Welcome to Rates and Barrels. It's Tuesday, September 10th. VanRiper, Sarris, Britt Ghiroli here with you on this episode. We are discussing promotions for Jasson Dominguez and Kumar Rocker, news that broke after we finished Monday's show. I think we willed the Dominguez promotion into existence, though, so we'll take partial credit for that.
Interestingly enough, they left Verdugo in the lineup.
Yeah, I know. It was a Stanton day off Monday, but I think the usual plan will be the one we outlined on Monday.
More
a lot of Verdugo to the bench, and a lot of Jasson Dominguez playing in a corner. We get the NL wildcard watch, the Mets making things more than interesting in that race. We'll take a look at how that's happened and how the Mets stack up to potential playoff opponents if they are able to secure one of those spots in the final weeks of the season. We're going to talk about the struggles of Justin Verlander and whether or not he will be a part of the Astros playoff rotation if his current form is the form we see at the end of the season. So we have a jam-packed show today. Very ambitious, I think, would be the way I would describe us. Let's get the quick promotion stuff done because Dominguez, as I outlined yesterday, the projections have closed in on the Alex Verdugo projection. Usually you look at a rookie or an inexperienced player and say, okay, there's a lot of swing and miss in the profile. Projection says 210, 220 average, low 300s OBP, a little bit of power, and a high strikeout rate. And that's not as good as what you get from a veteran like Verdugo. But Verdugo's struggles and Dominguez's success at the top levels of the minor leagues have pushed those numbers closer together. And this just feels like a way to give the Yankees a little bit of a boost as they try and wrestle away the AL East from the Orioles, but also to give Dominguez a window before the postseason where they can decide, even though it's a high stakes situation, whether or not he's an upgrade over Verdugo in the games that matter even more than the ones they're playing right now, right? So I think this makes all the sense in the world. And Britt, we've seen players come up in key spots. Dominguez debuted, of course, last year and got hurt, so it's not his major league debut, but he's got very limited big league experience. What is your expectation for how this is going to play out in the final weeks of the season?
Well, I like this because you look at their other options, and this is the reason we've been calling for him to come up, right? Why not bring him up? It's not like Verdugo was lighting the world on fire. Aaron Boone said to reporters yesterday, he's going to play a lot, which should be the plan when you call up a guy like this. He is eligible to play in the postseason because he was on their 40-man roster, at that date, the end of August. So I like this move. I think sometimes the playoffs is all about these people you don't expect giving you contributions, and he could definitely be an X factor. We know Aaron Judge is otherworldly. We know how good Juan Soto is, but just imagine if they get a little extra contributions from a guy like Dominguez, right? Like he could come up in big spots. He probably will. This is how the playoffs works, right? It's always the lesser names to an extent. I think this is a good move for the Yankees. They have a little distance. They're a game and a half up on the Orioles as we record this episode. The Orioles have plenty of problems, can't really consistently win. Maybe the Yankees, this helps them kind of reel off enough breathing room to take the American League East, which is what, really they've been trying all along. Teams try to set themselves up for the playoffs. The problem here with the Orioles and the Yankees is neither team has ever created enough space to say, we're going to win the AL East. So a guy like Dominguez, I think, sends the message that this organization wants to win, and they want to win now, and they're willing to try different things, which sometimes I think fans are just maddened by the lack of activity, by sticking with Verdugo, by wondering, why we are platooning certain guys. So I think if you're a Yankees fan, you're pretty excited that the guy they call the Martian is back up with the big league team and figures to get a real chance.
And the last time we discussed this team that doesn't ever get any attention, I think at that point, Anthony Rizzo was still on the IL. Dominguez was still in the minors, and Jazz Chisholm was hurt. Chisholm has since returned. Rizzo has since returned, and now Dominguez is up. So a lot of those questions we were asking about the supporting cast behind Judge and Soto could have an answer. That's a huge possible lift for the Yankees. To me, that's something that makes them a lot more dangerous if their lineup has that extra length behind Soto and Judge.
Yeah, and one thing that I really like too is that in their trade for Jazz Chisholm, in their development of Austin Wells, and now putting Jasson in center, I think that they've not only added an element of youth and speed and defense to this team, they've done it up the middle in key positions. with Volpe at short at being such a great defender. Now, at least the role players are all playing, great defense at important positions on the field. And then, like what Britt's saying, that sort of unexpected contribution can be their offensive stuff. But you're really shoring up defense and speed, and you're adding an element to a Yankees team that has historically been a little bit older, a little bit more plodding, a little bit more, we need the homers to win kind of thing. This is a little bit more of a dynamic offense that can do different things and really pick it. So, I mean, kudos to them, because I think one of the hardest things to do in the two timeline world where everyone's trying to compete and develop is give your kids enough chances to establish themselves. And this year they managed, over the last year plus, they've managed to give Volpe and Wells and hopefully now Dominguez enough chance to establish themselves as major leaguers while they're young, while the team is competing. That is, I think, a tricky thing to really pull off. And that's probably why this has taken so long. I mean, people have been yelling for this Jasson Dominguez thing for so long. The problem is Verdugo is a credible veteran, projectable. There's no risk in putting Verdugo out there, it seems. But, the longer he does poorly, the more the numbers kind of change. So, but I think that this is a good change for the Yankees, and it may end up being a big deal because they're really looking for somebody to step up. If it's not Glaber, if it's not Volpe, if it's not Wells, they need a cleanup hitter. They need somebody behind Judge, and they need to extend that lineup a little bit beyond Judge and Soto. And I think Jasson, the Martian, he can do it. What we saw in the first game was speed. He stole third and scored a kind of a crucial run at the time. It didn't turn out to be a crucial run in the end, but it brought the game tighter, and it was all legs.
Also having the flexibility with Dominguez being capable enough center fielder, you don't have to run Judge out there every single day. Take a little wear and tear off of Judge select times.
He's poorly rated.
Yeah, but they at least trust him more than they would trust
Verdugo or Judge and Soto and Verdugo are poorly rated.
Oh, yeah. Well, yes,
Yeah.
The average.
Jasson's numbers are in really small samples. So
right, I think there are questions about some of the things we've seen from him coming through as a prospect defensively, but could end up being an upgrade given the alternatives. Judge, I think his defense in center field was something we discussed previously too. It's just like he has the ability to play it. It doesn't mean it's a great idea. That's sort of the main thing. He might be their best option in a non-Dominguez lineup to play that spot. That's probably the way they've.
You want him running the most out of every outfielder is like a type of question,
Yeah, absolutely. The other promotion coming Thursday, Kumar Rocker, who's looked fantastic coming off of Tommy John surgery. 18 Ks against 1 walk in just 10 innings at AAA. 29-3 strikeout to walk in AA this year in 19 2/3 innings. Getting a nice soft landing spot. That Mariners lineup has struggled throughout the season. You've looked at the numbers as far as the Stuff Plus model on Kumar Rocker, and there's quite a bit to like here. So it's a great audition, chance for him to sort of get broken into big league level for a handful of starts before, I assume, taking over a regular spot in this Rangers rotation for the next several years. I would imagine any projection for this Rangers rotation to begin 2025 has Rocker in it.
Yeah, he throws the death ball. We all love pitches with weird names and fun acronyms. So he throws the death ball, 85 miles an hour straight down. So just like a little baby curve. And there are some questions about his fastball shape. He may end up being more of a sinker guy. He has kind of a sinker shape on his fastball. But he throws the ball on average around 98 miles an hour. So even if the shape is not amazing on his four-seamer, if he throws it 98 and locates it as he has been, then it won't matter so much because they'll have to honor the 84-mile-an-hour death ball and the sinker and the 98-mile-an-hour four-seam. So I think he has what it takes to succeed. And the minor league strikeout and walk numbers are crazy good. He's like striking out 40% of the guys he sees in the minors this year.
Yeah, there's a guy named Paul Skeens who we might have heard of. And
we talked about his fastball shape.
His numbers aren't as good as Rocker's. Just to put it in perspective, his minor league numbers were not as good as Rocker's. Just to put in perspective of what is going on. because the Texas Rangers didn't have to call him up, right? Actually, he forced their hand by putting up such ridiculous numbers. And to me, what this says is that the Rangers want him to get the experience now because he's going to hit the ground running next year as part of the rotation. If they didn't call him up this year, you might have seen some spring training getting his feet wet, maybe some up and downs in April, early May. They don't want any of that. They want him to get out some growing pains now. And he certainly earned the promotion. But I think that the Rangers want to pencil him in, like we said, as part of that rotation and have no plans or assumptions that he's going to take a step back. So that's really what this means, because this is a full year before they have to make a decision to even protect him. So this guy's been kicking down the door. He hasn't been shy about the fact that he needs to be up here. And so it's really kind of cool to see. I know Skeens has gotten so much attention and limelight, rightfully so. But like I said, this guy has been better, and it will be really interesting to see how he fares, not just in this few weeks, but how he takes these few weeks, these reads on big league hitters, into next spring training, right? There's so much valuable expertise. And this is why the big, it's a little bit of an older baseball thing where you call up guys for September call-ups, with the expanded rosters, because it is really valuable to get these reps at the big league level in September. And that's what the Rangers are getting.
Yeah, and it's good to think about, you're right, about what this rotation will look like next year. Right now, I think Eovaldi has played himself into the ability to decline the $20 million player option he has, and try to get, a last, 2-3 year deal, or maybe not even the last. I mean, some guys are pitching into their 40s, but get a 3-year deal instead of just taking the 1 and 20. If he does that, then the only pitchers they have under contract at the major league level for the rotation are DeGrom, Malley, and John Gray, who is currently has a neuroma in his foot. So that's just 3 veterans that have not been really that healthy. You'd kind of want 4 more pitchers. So I think Jack Leiter is going to be important for them next year, maybe as their 6th guy. Kumar Rocker looks like he's, slotting as high as 3rd or 4th already as a rookie next year. And you'll probably see them go out in the free agent market and try to get one of their specials, which is, a kind of a 1 or 2 year deal with a veteran that they think can bounce back.
Yeah, I think with the core they have in place, they will fancy themselves playoff contenders again in 2025. There's no reason why they would tear down what they did coming off a World Series win last year. This year, of course, with the injuries they were dealing with all season, we knew there was a possible step back. Still remains to be seen if we get an extension for Chris Young. That was something we brought up a couple of weeks ago. The front office not under contract for next year yet.
Still haven't heard about that. Yeah, his AGM of player development, Ross Fenstermaker too. So, I mean, those are 2 guys that have done some good work in the short time they've been there. It's sort of surprising they're still out there.
Yeah, but for a team that doesn't seem like it's getting to the postseason this year, there's still a lot to be excited about for Rangers fans watching Rocker and the eventual return of Jacob deGrom here in the coming days. Let's shift the focus over to the NL wildcard watch, where the Mets are more than hanging around. They have made things very interesting. If you go back to early July, I picked July 5th because I like looking at the FanGraphs rolling playoff odds, trying to find the dips. July 5th, the Mets had a 29.3% chance of making the playoffs. And that was actually up quite a bit from some of their valleys in the first half when they were single digits at stretches.
Yep.
It didn't look like a playoff year for the Mets in the early stretches of the season, but they've been on this gradual rise, have played really well basically since late May, give or take. They're up to a 58.8% chance of making the playoffs, and they've taken a little bit of playoff share away from Atlanta in the same division. And the Braves sit at 62.5% right now, so it's still kind of in that back and forth coin flip sort of situation. The Diamondbacks, just for comparison, 83.7%. They have been cruising. They were also in the same kind of range as the Mets. 24.6% playoff odds back on July 5th. Arizona's played exceptionally well over the last 2 months or so now. So a lot to look at here. And I think the first real question is, how good is this Mets team compared to other teams we're going to see in the postseason, specifically in the rotation? Because I think that's where they entered the year with a lot of big questions. The Kodai Senga injury to start the year left a lot to be desired, I think, in terms of quality, and they have found a way to make it work so far. Like when you look at the quality of what they've been able to assemble, Sean Manaea has been kind of a fantastic pickup in free agency. David Peterson's a guy we talked about yesterday who's exceeded expectations. They've really had a lot of things go better than expected. We know it's a pitcher-friendly environment, but it's not just that. Luis Severino isn't the old Luis Severino, but he's at least a good starter for them, and he's chewed up a ton of innings, getting to 166 innings through the first 5 months and change of this season. But I think a lot of people will say against the likes of the Phillies and the Dodgers, they would be underdogs just based on the pitching matchups alone. Do you think that gap is too much for them to overcome as they're currently constructed?
Yeah, it is. It is interesting because, the reason why the Mets, even though they're a game ahead of the Braves, and just a game behind the Diamondbacks, have the worst playoff odds of the three, is that, in terms of true talent, how good is this team really? Over at Fangraphs, they say the Mets are a 496 win percentage team, so not even a 500 team. They're a team that would go, 80 and 82 kind of deal in a full season. And the Braves are a 561 true talent, supposedly better than the Phillies in that regard going forward. And the Diamondbacks are a 542 team. So, they're looking at those and they're saying, it is going to be close because there's not that many games left, but the Diamondbacks are going to win more games. The Braves are going to win more games. The Mets are going to kind of go 500, except if you look over the last month, if you look at the last month, the Mets are 18-9. The Braves are 17-11, as much as bellyaching is going on over there. And Arizona's 15-11. So really anything can happen in a 30-game stretch. If they have another, 20-game stretch, just like the one they had, then the Mets will be in those, and they'll be ahead of those other two teams. So that's what's exciting. Yeah. And I do think that when you look at the Mets as they are constructed in terms of, what their strengths and weaknesses are, the thing that really stands out is that rotation. I mean, the lineup's pretty good. I mean, Lindor is doing a lot of the carrying, but as Marte gets healthy, Vientos hits the ball really hard. Alvarez hits the ball really hard. Nimmo's underrated. It's a pretty good lineup that's covered up a little bit by a really pitcher-friendly park. So, it's a decent lineup that has some of their numbers suppressed by that park. On the other hand, the starting rotation, Jose Quintana, Luis Severino, Sean Manaea, who's been a revelation with the new arm slot, David Peterson's been all right, and Paul Blackburn. I mean, I think as much as I like Sean Manaea, the best I can give him is like a 2-3 on a playoff team. I don't see an ace here, but I did do a little bit of research just to put in context, like what it looks like to have a World Series contending starting rotation. And over the last 10 years, the World Series winner on average had the 9th best rotation in baseball. And the World Series loser on average had the 9th best rotation in baseball. And the better rotation won the World Series 5 out of 10 times.
Yeah.
But there's a little bit of maybe a mini shift going on in baseball. Because if you remember 2014 and 2015, right at the beginning of the sample, that was the Royals and the Giants. And they had the 20th and the 25th best rotations. If you remember, they weren't about their rotations. They were
no, it's the bullpens. Yeah.
Yeah. But what I'm saying is I think they inspired a lot of people to spend more time on their bullpens. And I think that there's been a shift. So if you look at the last 8 years and you take those guys out and you say, those guys change baseball a little bit. Everybody has good bullpens now. Maybe it matters a little bit more to have a good starting rotation. You might be right, because in the last 8 years, the World Series winner has had the 5th best starting rotation on average, and the World Series loser has had the 7th best. So that's that. So you kind of, if you want to go to the World Series, generally in the last 10 years, you want to have a top 10 starting rotation. And right now, the Mets are 22nd in that regard.
Okay. Yeah, there are
But
some
that's
holes.
World Series versus playoffs. I mean, I
Yeah,
know this is
yeah.
a small bit of analysis done on a little piece of paper, but
I like it.
You need to use a full sheet.
I know. What's up with that?
It's very eco-friendly that you're not even using a whole sheet for your notes.
It looks like your dog ate the rest of it, kind of thing.
This is what my office looks like.
I agree. Listen, I don't think we're going to sit here and make a case for the Mets to win the World Series on one hand. On the other hand, I feel like people sit and try to make sense of the playoffs every year, and you can't make sense of the playoffs. Like you just said, 5 out of 10 times it works. That's a coin flip.
Yeah.
That's a coin flip. So
yeah, even in the last 8 years, it's 5 out of 8. The better rotation had won. So,
and any front office person you talk to will tell you that nobody has figured out how to win in the playoffs because, just like as Billy Beane used to say, yeah, getting there is all you can do. Once you get there, the best team doesn't always win. It's the hottest team. And you look at the Mets and you look at games like last night, like they really didn't have any business winning that game, and they've done that a lot. They didn't have any business. They don't have any business being the best team in baseball since like June something, which is what they are. Jose Quintana's been terrible. If they had any options at all, he wouldn't have been in that. They would have taken him out of the rotation a while ago. Jeff McNeil, that injury hurts. You look at the Mets and you're like, how are they doing this, right? And I think sometimes it's really tough to quantify. Lindor is having a terrific season. Minaya has been great as well. And Severino, when they needed him, has come up big. I think Edwin Diaz being back to Edwin Diaz has certainly helped for that psyche because when Edwin Diaz is blowing save after save, the Mets just don't have the ability to recover from that. You saw that a little bit earlier on in the season. I think they're a pesky team. I think they're one of those teams that if they get in and they get hot, you look at what happened with Arizona and Texas last year, right? Was Texas a better team on paper? Did they have a better rotation? Of course they did. However, we see this all the time. So I feel like if you're the Mets and you're David Stearns, you're thinking like, if we get in, we could win a series. We could win a game or two. And that's how this whole thing starts, right? That's how the boulder starts moving. So I think the Mets have been a fun team to watch. I don't think anybody expected them to be relevant if you go back to May, that they would be relevant here as we sit here on September 10th, talking about the fact that the Padres and Arizona have played so well means that the Mets have had to earn this, right? Where sometimes I feel like we sit here and we talk about, nobody wants the last playoff spot, all this mediocrity. These teams have played really well, which I think is nice and refreshing, right? Whoever goes out of that NL wildcard, like those teams have earned that right. We aren't seeing a lot of backing in this year, which has been nice. The Padres have been one of the hottest teams in baseball. Arizona's been very good. An executive said to me about Arizona, last year they were lucky, this year they're good, which really kind of illustrates what you're dealing with if you're the Mets. It would have been easy to fall off and be 7 games back, 8 games back. Oh, a good season, they got to 500. But really, I like what Carlos Mendoza has done in his first year as manager, surrounding himself with more veteran coaches to really kind of balance out the fact that he was a new manager in a big media market. I think the talent that we didn't see and that we were questioning why they weren't better last year, we're starting to see some of that. And Mark Vientos has had a terrific year. He's been a guy who I think they weren't sure what to expect from him. And he has been, Lindor obviously has carried them offensively, but Vientos has had some good hits. And Jesse Winker has been an interesting pickup for them where you kind of are forget it happened because there were hundreds of moves that didn't really matter, it seemed like. And that's one of them that you're like, wow, this guy's had a bunch of really big moments for the Mets and he's barely been on the Mets, for a few weeks now. So yeah. I do like what they've done. I do think there's a lot of momentum. And I think the NL wildcard race has been really fun, which is nice because there are years where it feels like one of these teams that gets in is not going to be very good. I don't know how you guys feel. I won't feel like that this year as it's presently constructed because these teams have played so well.
I don't know if I have a lot of years where I look at the last wildcard team in and have a vibe of this team's bad. Why are they here? I think that can happen with the expanded field playoffs. I just don't know if it's happened yet. It's a great call on Vientos. He's been their best hitter by WRC+. I mean, tons of power. I think he's exceeded even the more optimistic projections that anyone could have had. We've known he's had power. The question was, would the swing and miss offset it to the point where he couldn't be a regular? But he's been great. And a lot of times we talked about the number of players a team relies on that are above average with the bat. The Mets have a lot. Vientos, Lindor, Alonso, JD Martinez. Winker's kind of a semi-regular. Nimmo's in that group. Starling Marte has been right about league average. So they've got 7 regulars basically that are in that group, and a few part-time guys like Jose Iglesias who've been really good. The McNeil injury it's a bummer, but I think Iglesias can do most of the things that Jeff McNeil can do. They could get a little more mileage out of someone like Francisco Alvarez at the plate. He's dangerous, at least has some thump. So I think the lineup's the thing that could make them a problem come October. I mean, this is a team that's hit more home runs than the Phillies this year. I didn't expect that from the Mets, especially having to play in that ballpark. They're 7th as a team in WRC+. Every team ahead of them is a pretty clear playoff team. It's the Yankees, Dodgers, Orioles, Diamondbacks, Padres, and Astros. So they're in great company as far as what they're doing, at least on the run production side. It's just going to be whether or not they can out-hit their pitching, or that the pitching is game planned and just effective enough at the right time to get the job done.
It could be a lot better staff, I think, if it got slimmed down. A playoff version of this staff is probably better than the full season version of the staff. If you're just basically running Severino and Manaea out there in the bullpen game, or figuring things out like that, Peterson on a short lease, that sort of stuff. I think that it's a lot better. You threw a little throwaway comment in there that you don't always look at. You don't usually look at the last, wild card and wonder how good they are. I love the Twins, and I'm not really talking trash on that, but I do want to put the NL wildcard race up against the AL wildcard race in one way, which is the third AL wildcard seems to be a team that doesn't want it. Yeah. In the last 30 days, Seattle's 11-15, Boston is 12-16, and Minnesota is 11-17. Now, that's not necessarily the true talent, and I know people go up and down, but it is just weird to have these two things go up against it, where the AL wild card seems like somebody's going to slink their way into that last spot, as opposed to the NL wild card where someone's going to surge their way into their last spot. So I'm not saying Minnesota's a bad team. I do think they'll be on one of the wild cards, but right now they're not playing like a great team, and there's some rumblings in Minnesota about that right now.
Yeah, let's get to the AL side for a minute, because Rocco Baldelli showing rare frustration over the weekend. That will happen when you score two runs in 3 games against the Royals and get swept. That'll happen. Aaron Gleeman had a good column on The Athletic breaking down some of the problems. The Twins recently during this slump have been a lot less disciplined, 3rd most in chase rate outside the strike zone. So, just like whiffing on the 5th most swings overall while posting the 3rd worst strikeout to walk ratio. That's basically like a 3 or 4 week snapshot. I think that defines what happens during a slump. Like, I don't think it means it's a permanent, this team's going to be undisciplined at the plate the rest of the season, but the timing of your worst stretch, it does a lot to shape the narratives about your team. Like, playing your worst baseball at this time of year raises a lot more questions than having a bad run in June and then bouncing back and playing really well in July and August. So I would look at this team and say, they were 63-40 from late April through mid-August until this run started. They look like they were in control of the AL Central. The roster is still that core group, and they've been missing some key players, right? Correa, Buxton, Max Kepler on the IL. I think having a combination of those guys back would go a long way. I know Royce Lewis has been in a slump. That's probably going to change at some point between now and the end of the season. So I think it's just a question of, can they weather the storm? There's something, I think it's intangible about a club, and sometimes it comes down to the coaching staff, the manager, the guys in the room. How do they handle the adversity when things are going wrong? Are the Twins going to find a way to put the pieces back together and just get back to being the team they were for most of the season? Or will this continue to spiral on them? They're 6-15 in their last 21 after dropping Monday's game to the Angels. So the impassioned closed door meeting speech didn't have an immediate effect against a team that will not be in the postseason. And the other question I have for you guys about the Twins,
tend to think those things don't really have I tend to think that, like, if you're a player and you're watching your manager lose it in a meeting, you, on some level you're rolling your eyes.
Well, at some level you're just like, what's the solution? Like, does being yelled at actually help anyone? I don't know. Why didn't
Well,
the
I
Twins
think
do anything at the trade deadline? Help me understand this. Why was this team in control of the AL Central at that time, or at least in a position to win the AL Central? The Guardians weren't going to go away easily. We know the Royals were going to be pesky.
Yeah, but what
How
do
do
they
you go to
do?
your trade deadline and only add Trevor Richards? That was the only move they made at the deadline. And I think that would be, of all the things that have been going wrong for them, I would criticize them more for their trade deadline than for their last 21 games, because that was their chance to patch up the roster and be ready to be
They're
a
a little
legitimate
gun-shy
October
after giving
contender.
up
And they
real assets for Tyler Mahle and Chris Paddock and all their guys, all the pitchers they've traded for basically have been hurt.
Yeah, maybe they're up against their ownership imposed spending limit. Maybe that was a factor, but for whatever reason, they were very quiet at the deadline, and they should have done anything.
But Britt was having a
up against
reaction
Rocker.
about the rah-rah speech. What was that?
Well, no, I just well, I mean, as someone who was covered beats and was in clubhouses for days and days and years, I think you pick your spots. I think for Rocco Baldelli, like, you're so tired of facing the media and saying, "We'll go get him tomorrow," and then you go out and you watch your team play like they played in that Royals series. Was embarrassing if you were a Twins fan. Embarrassing. They got shut out 2 of the games. They scored 2 runs in the other one, and everyone goes after the pitching, which is fine. But when you score 2 runs and the league average is over 4 runs, it doesn't matter. Like, you have to score. You have to hit. Aaron Gleeman did a great dissection of what's gone on with the hitters. The exit velocity is down. The rate of contact is down. The quality of contact is down. This is over the last month. This is the entire lineup. I don't know. You guys would know much better than me if this is something that is common. Are they all tired? Are they doing too much work? I'm not sure. But I think with Rocco Baldelli, you don't make that kind of a speech hoping that guys are like, "Oh, okay, I'll try now. We weren't trying the last month." No, you do it because you're at your wit's end. You want everyone to know that you're tired of talking to the media and saying, "These guys will turn it around." You want to light a fire. And you're also hoping that some of the veteran guys in there, because the manager can only do so much, will stand up and say, "This is unacceptable. We have to get better." Because it really is the veteran players who set the tone in the clubhouses. Managers really aren't in clubhouses very much. It is very much the player space. So you're hoping to get something.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I was saying.
Out of
Like,
these
if the
guys.
manager comes in and is yelling, then you're like, why are you in my space yelling at me? It's like,
Yes.
If it was me, I'd probably be like, okay.
But with a guy like Rocco
outta
Baldelli
here.
who doesn't get upset, it's worth something, right? It's not Ozzie Guillen yelling because he yells when he orders breakfast, right? It's like you
Yeah, it is
your spots.
It is the change of tone. I think that's a good point as far as just trying to convey a different message to your club. Whether or not it's effective, I think, is still an open question. But I do think it's out of character for Rocco, based on everything I've heard and seen from him, just to see like that doesn't seem like his style. So I think that speaks to the level of frustration. And who knows? Like, if this season doesn't go the way that the ownership group expected, maybe they make a change at manager. That's a possible thing. I don't know what that actually does to make the product on the field better. We always wonder what the impact of a manager is. I never got the sense that Rocco's tactics were so bad that it was costing the team games. Maybe people that watch this team every day have a lot of specific criticisms of Rocco Baldelli that they will send our way as soon as we release this episode. But this team should be better, no matter how you slice it. And I think it's the combination of things going wrong at just about the worst time. And even with all of that, the amazing thing is, using that July 5th comparison point, it was just over 2 months ago, the Twins' playoff odds have actually increased since July 5th. They were at a 76.8% on the 5th of July. They're at 79.1%.
Other teams that I mentioned just sort of fading into oblivion. I mean, we talked about the Mariners, not being able to hit, and we've talked on this show about the news that I've heard that they are actually considering changing the batter's eye, and so they're obviously doing some real soul searching about their batting program there, because the pitching program is so good, and their rotation is so good. It'd be a shame to waste this rotation, which it seems like they're going to do again. So I think they're doing some real inward searching when it comes to batting. I don't know. The Red Sox have had such a tumultuous season. Like, I think traditionally you've been like, can we get somebody to pitch here? And then they were like the best pitching staff in baseball for 1 month, and then back to being terrible. But that 1 month sort of gives you the idea that like maybe these arms aren't so bad, and like, you know what, like I think there is a little bit of like what now in Boston to some extent, and maybe the what now is just, hey, ownership, spend some money on arms, bring us some outside free agent arms in to bolster what we're doing in here, because we've done some good, but it would be better if we also spent some money on the rotation. So that's my guess for what they do in the offseason, is try to get a big pitcher.
Yeah, and in Derek say, I feel like the AL wild card is the epitome of this team probably shouldn't be here this year, because if you look at it, Minnesota, Kansas City, Baltimore, okay, Boston is only 2 games over 500. They're 73 and 71.
Mm-hmm.
Detroit's right behind them, 73 and 71. Theoretically, still in the hunt, but then you go to the NL, and these teams that are in it. Arizona is 80 and 64. The Mets are 79 and 65.
There's more stratification there for sure.
The fringy 500 team is the Cardinals, and they're 72 and 71, but they're 6.5 games out. So
and the Guardians, Royals, Twins, and Tigers are like, I ran the numbers at one point. They're like 30 and 5 against the White Sox.
Yeah, that's the other thing people were pointing out. Twins fans were saying if you take the White Sox out, the Twins are a lot. What's the Twins record? Someone look that up against the White Sox.
Yeah.
Because how much does that pad things, right? How much has playing the White Sox helped them and maybe covered up some of these blemishes during some of their hotter streaks? I don't know. That is something that kind of came across on my feed, and I was curious, have they beat them pretty much every single time? Against
the White Sox, they are 4-0, 7-0. Let's see, we got a couple more here. 9-1, 12-1. Yes, against the White Sox, they're 11 games above 500, which means that against everybody else, they are basically 500.
Yeah, that'll happen when you have a really bad team in division.
There are 12 games over 500, and there are 11 games over 500 against the White Sox.
Yeah. So that is pretty interesting. And the White Sox should be a gimme for every team, but they're not a sweep for every team.
The weird thing too is that like offensively, the Twins have always been like a leader in barrels and hard hit rate, and this year they're now like 11th and 12th in those things. And it actually, there might be some funny sort of process thing that happens where they get yelled at and they all swing harder and their barrel rates go up.
Can't wait to see the result of that.
Maybe you could yell somebody into swinging harder. Maybe they'd be like, crap, things are going to change. I better swing harder.
I'm gonna guess you can't, but maybe.
I would guess that some of that has to also do with backfilling, the injured guys that would have hit the ball harder.
Yeah, that's probably a big part of it.
Really hard. Correa hits the ball pretty hard. So
it's another situation though. When you look at the entire season and you look at the Twins alongside the Phillies, they have the same team WRC plus. The Phillies have hit 2 more home runs. They strike out about the same, just under 22%. The lineups are more similar than you'd ever expect, even with some of the underlying process things being different. So yeah, this could be one of those scenarios, Britt, where the team that gets this last wild card spot absolutely backs in, and they're one of the first teams we look at and say, "Why? This is why expanded playoffs are bad. This team shouldn't be there." But if the Twins start playing better ball in the next 2 to 3 weeks,
I mean, Correa comes back, Royce Lewis comes out of his slump. There's, Buxton can. There's definitely things that can happen in the last couple of weeks that'll change the scope of this lineup again.
Who do you like to actually get this spot though? Like between the Twins, the Red Sox, the Tigers, the Mariners. I know the Tigers are playing really well over the last 6 weeks or so, but the Tigers feel like the one that doesn't belong yet. Like the Twins, Red Sox, and Mariners at least all made sense going to the year as teams we thought we'd see in October. The Tigers, I think, were one notch below them. I thought they could be a team on the rise.
But they also serve as a little bit of notice for the Mariners and Red Sox, which is, we thought we were better than the Tigers, but the Tigers are now in our mix, and the Tigers may have, in some ways, at least a similar up arrow to us, in terms of like putting together, some good top end pitching plus developing young players in the lineup. Like that's the Red Sox want to say, well, we have good young players in our lineup. Yes, that's true. So do the Tigers kind of, Yeah. So if you want to make the playoffs next year, you gotta beat the Tigers as well as, all the other teams you want to try to get in.
Do you think the run differentials of these teams will end up leading us to the actual winner of the final wild card? Because by that, the Mariners at plus 46 are the best of the Twins, Red
Is
Sox,
that one of the
Tigers so
tiebreakers?
far. Well, no, I just think in terms of like what's going to separate these teams. Right now, there's a 3-game gap between the Twins and the field, but they're all close enough where it's possible that any one of those 3 teams ends up getting the wild card.
And also the Mariners, because they pitch so well, I know they can't hit their way out of a paper bag and obviously had issues. But if you look at it, they actually would project to be kind of a dangerous team because they can pitch. They'd have to win games 1-0, but kind of dangerous. Twins could be dangerous if we get the Twins that we get in the middle chunk of the season, not the start of the season Twins, not the last month Twins, the middle chunk of the season, very specific middle chunk of the season Twins. They could be very good. So I don't know. And I know we talk about the Royals a little bit, but I do think it's important to note that what they have done has been really impressive. I mean, they lose Vinny Pasquantino, and people think, well, this is it. This was a nice story for them. One of their best hitters outside of Bobby Witt Jr., who, if Aaron Judge wasn't doing the stuff Aaron Judge was doing, we'd be talking about Bobby Witt Jr. a lot more. I think that's getting buried a little bit. What the Royals have created, that culture under JJ Picollo, really is impressive. This seems to be the tip of the iceberg, I think, for them. And it's really been fun to watch. They put on a clinic again over the limping Twins over the weekend. They're just not going away. And I like the moves that they made this offseason. They obviously went and spent, over $100 million, which bigger teams say we can't spend money. The Royals proved if the Royals can do it, you can do it. And then at the trade deadline, unsatisfied, they made little tweaks, right? And even when they lose Pasquantino, they pick up a bunch of guys for basically nothing, like Tommy Pham, and those guys have helped them. So I really, as much as it is Minnesota has been floundering, I also want to give credit to the Royals, who have really hung around and weathered a decent amount of adversity.
Yeah, I love their like deadline and post deadline. It's Tommy Pham, Paul DeJong, Yuli Gurriel. Those are credible veterans that are, I would say, probably they're not valued by the market. That's why they weren't nobody spent money on them in the offseason. That's why they were available, because they're in that sort of just short of league average. They're like, in WAR terms, wins above replacement terms, they're like 1.5 win guys, maybe 2. Those are not the type of players you kind of want to sign, because you're always looking to be better than average, especially if you're paying somebody real money. But that means that they're available, and he needed that in a couple spots, and that made them a lot better. But also, just speaking to what they've done generally, I think that they've changed some of their pitching development in terms of the Brady Singer coming to camp with 2 new pitches. Seth Lugo coming to camp with 9 pitches. Mike Lorenzen. So a couple of years ago, we talked about on this show about a Royals pitcher that was told to stop throwing his sweeper, and he stopped throwing his sweeper, and he sucked for a while, and then he just started throwing his sweeper, and nobody noticed. So that was the Royals of 2 years ago. The Royals now acquire Mike Lorenzen from the Rangers, where the team doctor says you shouldn't throw sweepers. It's bad for your elbow. We did a piece. Ken Rosenthal did a piece about this. Keith Meister, he's the team doctor. They don't really throw sweepers in Texas. Well, guess what they do with Mike Lorenzen? They say stop throwing your regular slider, throw your sweeper. And Mike Lorenzen's been better with Kansas City than he was with Texas in terms of underlying numbers. So that sort of change can happen pretty quickly. And I really love this quote that you found from JJ Picollo, because we talk about how hard it is to change things. He is saying in this quote, just not to like ruin it for you ahead of time, but this is how I read it. We had the elements in place, but we needed leadership to align with those elements in a different way. So if you think about that while you listen to this quote, I think it makes sense how you can maybe change an organization quickly if this is the case.
For a long time, we've been criticized for not being analytically driven, just being behind the scenes. I know that we were analytically driven. We just had traditional minds, as heads of departments. So I think it was a little bit unfair or unjust But whatever, it was what it was. But over the last year and a half, the people that we've begun to employ in our hiring practices, we were looking for people with more diverse backgrounds and how they were raised in the game. So to avoid that, being too one-sided, whether it's traditional thought and just grind your way through baseball or too analytical. So anyway, we've hired a lot of people from our major league manager to really entry-level positions of people who have different backgrounds. And it's really helped us. It's helped us learn from each other, respect one another, think about the game in different ways. And that's been exciting for us.
So that was JJ Picollo on the windup earlier this year with Jason Stark and Doug Glanville. And it's interesting to me that as someone who's been in the organization since 2006, JJ gets elevated to a higher leadership position and realizes that, hey, we got to make sure we're not only like listening to the new ideas, but we're continually finding new ideas, right? I think that's a huge part of how you keep an organization moving forward. And I think there were some people who believed when JJ Picollo took over for Dayton Moore, kind of heading up baseball operations, that it might be more of the same in Kansas City. But I think it's a sign that this organization actually could be good beyond this season. I think there's a lot to unpack with just like how they're doing it. It's interesting that we've been so critical of the Mariners lineup all season, by the way, because there are so many different paths to being league average or close to it at the plate. Both the Mariners and the Royals have 99 WRC pluses on the season. The Royals do a great job tempering strikeouts, right? 18.7%.
Yeah,
they're hitting 253.
That's been the big problem in Seattle.
That's been a huge difference, right? And they've shown better, more power in terms of slugging percentage than the Mariners too,
because they have batting average.
Because they've got the batting average, but then like both of these teams hit the same number of home runs, like 161 for Seattle, 160 for Kansas City. They both run a lot. Mariners 121 stolen bases, but Royals 116.
Seattle to begin the season said they wanted to cut that strikeout rate, and they didn't.
Right. And I think if you said which of those teams is more dangerous in the postseason, not knowing anything else about them, throwing out the quality of their pitching, the quality of their defense, which lineup would you rather face in the postseason? You'd rather face Seattle's lineup in the postseason because
you can get out of an inning with a strikeout.
Balls in play are your worst nightmare in those situations. So I think if you're going to be league average, you'd rather be league average with that low K rate, even if there's something else, there's a little extra juice, maybe power wise, maybe you walk a little more. That's the difference for Seattle. I'd much rather go into a series built the way the Royals are built lineup wise than built the way the Mariners are, even though they grade out as the same by WRC plus.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Another interesting thing that I hear when he's talking is I tend to think a lot about organizations and how they're built and how they communicate. And, one thing that I do know from, Houston is that in some ways they've lost, an AGM with analytical ties, so there's no longer really, some feel there's no longer really a voice for the analytics work that's being done. Now, you can't say that the Astros went from being a league leader in analytics and sort of progressive tactics to being bad at it. They're not. There's still a lot of the same people that are doing the same work there. But if you don't have the ear at the leadership position, then two things happen. The people who are doing the work, even rightly or wrongly, feel like, where's this work going? And then the other thing is you just don't have anybody implementing the work that's being done. So it becomes true, like that you need to have people who are listening to it. So JJ can say, oh yeah, we were doing all that work. But if the leaders of the departments weren't sort of that inclined to listen, when they come up and say, we need to do this or we need to do this or it's spin axis or whatever, then they're not implementing the work that's being done. So that's how you can change things quickly, is if you think like things are being done down here that are pretty good. We just need up there to listen and to really implement all this. Then that's I think can be a little bit of a difference between the White Sox, because the White Sox did the same thing where they took somebody that was in place and put him above, and like Chris Getz, without really going out there and they get there's a hire from within. But I don't think there's that same, we were doing the work on the ground. Now we just need to listen, And they did a little bit where they like changed the stuff at the top. Let's bring in Brian Bannister. He'll change everything about our pitching development. And he can, but he's one guy. And so if he's out there trying to change every pitcher or make a plan for every pitcher, you got like 200 pitchers in there. Like what are you going to do?
Yeah,
so,
I agree.
So
I think,
you need to have some. There's a relationship though between like all the small hires and the big hires. And it's hard to get right. But you have to do both.
Yeah, I heard the same thing when I heard that. Like, yeah, a lot of clubs make the mistake of saying, well, yeah, we have analytics, we have analytic staffs, we use analytics, but if the decision makers aren't valuing that analytics, then what are you doing? I had an executive from a very successful team say recently to me, like, the problem with analytics with a lot of clubs is if they have a gut feeling on something and analytics confirms it, they'll listen. Mm-hmm. But if the analytics tells them the opposite, they won't. And that's not really using analytics.
Yeah, exactly.
Confirmation bias.
Right. So it can be a tricky, slippery slope. And I think, what JJ, recognized and also what he's done. And I want to give a lot of credit to Petraro in the dugout, because every time you talk to somebody, they bring up Q and what he's done coming from Tampa Bay, another great organization, as we know, really innovative, really progressive, changing the culture, setting expectations. He, I think, has done a great job and been a great conduit to that message that JJ Picollo has. And also the Royals have changed over, like you said, so many different departments. And as JJ said, once you get that diversity of thought and opinion, now you're creating something a little bit different, right? Now you're looking at it and you're saying, all right, we don't want to do what everyone else is doing. That's the mistake a lot of teams make. Every team's got 24 analysts. We should hire 24 analysts, even though we don't know what they're doing. We don't know what any of them are doing. Like, what I think the Royals are doing is saying, we're going to take a little of this bucket. We're going to take this bucket. And we're going to do things our way because we're the Kansas City Royals and we can't win the way the Yankees are winning, right? Mm-hmm. We can't win the way, even you mentioned the White Sox, like they don't have to payroll the White Sox out. Like, like they just don't have some of these resources. And so they have to take this information and they have to take these people and they have to not be afraid to take risks with things. And I think they've done that under the hood. There seems to be a lot of really like positivity radiating, not just from that organization, but from other people I talk to as it relates to what's going on in Kansas City. I think on the national scale, Bobby Witt Jr. should be a lot bigger deal than really the attention that he's getting. But there's so much more going on there than what Bobby Witt Jr. is doing.
Yeah. One thing I think about too is like, the length of a chance you get. Something I think about a lot because I'm in San Francisco, and it feels like in San Francisco you get 2 or 3 weeks. Even if you do well, you might go back down. There's a very sort of, what have you done for me lately? Very sort of, we have a fluid roster. You might be down, you might be up. We're all on board. We're all working together. But like, I'm in the minors, and I just had a great month. Luis Matos, I just had a great month in the majors, and now I'm in the minors. What's going on with that? So that put up against the A's, who are like, no, we're going to put you in place for 2 months, maybe a whole year, and give you a real shot at this. JJ Bleday, we're going to give you not only this year, but we're going to give you another year, because we're the A's and that's our currency. We can give you time. And so I think back on JJ Picollo coming in and saying, Bobby Witt is our starting shortstop, full stop. I don't want to hear about it. That's it. Let's stop talking about it. He's our shortstop. And that allowed, I think, Bobby Witt to kind of flourish defensively as well as offensively, just sort of being like, hey, you're our guy. We're putting you in place. We're not going to muck around you. Don't worry about third base. Don't worry about anything. Just man your position and hit the crap out of the ball. And he's been great because of, I think that's partially, that's something that is very different from organization to organization. As much as I love Tampa, I think Tampa's more of a like, hey, we're cycling through people here. You better do something or else you're out. You might be a platoon guy next week. So, it's a little bit different from organization to organization in terms of how much of a chance they give you, how they broadcast their confidence in you, what they tell you, that sort of stuff.
The last thing I just want to say about the Royals is I think defensively, they've been fantastic too. And I think a lot of times we underrate teams that thrive in that facet. I think it's one of those things that takes good pitching and makes it great, average pitching and makes it good. But I think they actually have good pitching. They're more in that first category. It's a good staff. They added to the bullpen at the deadline. Ersig was a good get. Hunter Harvey's been hurt, but I think that gives them 2 more high-quality arms. If both those guys are healthy at the end of the season, too, that makes them more dangerous when they shorten up and use fewer guys come playoff time. But if their defense continues to be airtight, they could just be a tough team from a run prevention perspective, too. It's not just their peskiness at the plate, their second lowest strikeout rate in the entire league.
How often can one game turn on one defensive mistake,
Right. If they can avoid that, that makes them a bit more of a problem against teams that are above their weight class overall. But I think the other thing that stood out to me, too, looking at the Royals, going back to our run differential conversation from a little while ago, they're a plus 91. Like, that's better than I would have expected. Just for context, the Orioles are a plus 84. The Astros are a plus 87. The Guardians are a plus 72. And those teams are quite a bit better than the Twins, Red Sox, Tigers, and Mariners, who are all in that 46 to plus 3 range as a group. So they're a cut above. The Royals are a cut above the other teams vying for wild card spots in the AL right now. At least they have been up to this point. And I think there's a lot of interesting reasons for that. But speaking of the Astros, Justin Verlander has not looked like himself since coming off the IL. And it's still, there's enough time for him to take the ball a few times and get right before the postseason begins. But it begins to raise a question about his role in October. How do you think the Astros will try to manage Justin Verlander in the postseason if the struggles we've seen since his return from the IL, it's only been 4 starts, if those continue over the rest of September?
Gently, because you're dealing with someone who is going to be a Hall of Famer, someone who has pitched in World Series, has pitched in big games, has been a huge part of that organization. So ego is a factor. This isn't like a rookie who's lost his way. This is a guy who is going to want the ball if the Astros get to the playoffs. So I think you have to look at the scenarios and say, are we going to run him out there? Do we feel comfortable he can get us 1 time through the order? Can he get us 12 outs? I think you have to look at the approach a little bit differently if he's not getting any better. I mean, that Sunday night baseball game, Arizona just clobbered him. That can't happen. Yeah, that can't happen in the playoffs. Like, you can't be giving games away. That's how series change on a dime. So I think that Houston has to, because he is so revered and has so much experience and knows himself and his body better than, probably 99% of the league, you have to have that kind of a conversation with him. And you have to approach it, like I said, probably gingerly and gently. And, he's a guy who's going to push back. He's not afraid to. So you have to look at, well, okay, who are we going to start if it's not Justin Verlander? It's not exactly the Houston Astros this year are not previous iterations of this Astros team, right? This is a team that has holes. This is a team that has benefited from the rest of the division having a lot of issues. So I think you have to look at it if you're Dana Brown and say, what is our best scenario here? Can we really leave Justin Verlander off the playoff roster? I don't think you can. I don't think you can. I think he has enough ability to help them. The question is how? How do you do that? Does he come out of the bullpen? Does he start the game and give you 2 innings? I don't know, but I don't think if we have to decide here on September 10th if Justin Verlander is part of their playoff roster, I still say he is.
Yeah, I think, what's weird is that, in terms of his stuff, it doesn't seem that far off. The stuff plus numbers are not the best of his career, but they'd be above average for other players. He's getting back up to 94 miles an hour. One thing we have to remember is that Arizona's actually really good. It's the best offense in baseball. So, we may just have seen him kind of run into that at the worst time, as he's trying to get back online. He has 2 starts in a row now against the Angels. He might be able to get right against them. So we might change our opinion a little bit over the next couple of weeks. And then lastly, I think that because of who he is and because I think the real option is Hunter Brown, because I think Yusei Kikuchi has pitched his way in. Fromber is your game 1 starter. I mean, that's your guy who's been with you forever. So it really comes down to Verlander or Brown for a start in the 3rd game. And what I would suggest is, reading between the lines of what Britt said and thinking of myself as a manager, I would start Justin Verlander in game 2 because usually there's a rest after game 2, and there's a day game. A day off. If whatever place in the schedule where you have a day off after it, you start Verlander. You have Hunter Brown in the pen to start the game. I don't know if he's like warming, but he's out there, and he starts throwing the minute Verlander starts putting people on, because you're right. You can't give up grand slam to Pavin Smith in the playoffs. If he gets to 2 people on, he might be out. So that's how I would treat it. And I would say, and that would be giving him all the respect in the world by saying, you're still a starter for us, still game 2 starter for us. And we still need you. But if we can't give you, 7 RBI to one player, that can't happen. So
I think it's really hard when you look at how well Hunter Brown's pitched since late May.
I was hoping to look at his splits. I was hoping to look at his splits and be like, he's slow down, but 1.45 ERA in August. So.
But I do think if you're in a position, it's a longer series, and you can start Verlander in front of an off day, and you have someone like Blanco or Arrighetti that you could just throw for innings behind him if he doesn't have it, like that would probably be among the best options you have, where you can sort of try to have your cake and eat it too if you think there's a chance he could right the ship, but you're not so certain of it that.
What if he goes out and dominates against the Angels like he should?
You stick with the plan. You still start him in game 2 so that you have both that help.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think you're looking at this more as like the entire body of work for the season. That's how you're kind of coming up with this plan and saying, recent form is confirming some of the things we saw at the beginning of the year. So let's reevaluate where and how we want to use Verlander in the postseason. I think that's probably where they're at. I mean, look, he's 41. He's been hurt a lot this year, so it's going to happen eventually. It happens to everybody. We are going to go on our way out the door. A reminder, you can get a subscription to The Athletic at theathletic.com/ratesandbarrels. $2 a month gets you in the door for the first year. You can find us on Twitter. Britt is at Britt_Ghiroli. Eno is at Sarris. I am at Derek VanRiper. The pod is at Rates and Barrels. And of course, you can join our Discord using the link in the show description. Be sure to jump in there. If you got a mailbag question for a future episode, that's probably the best way to send those at this point. That's going to do it for this episode of Rates and Barrels. We're back with you Thursday at 1 o'clock Eastern on YouTube.
Thanks for listening.